Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy. Before we get to the episode, I have a very special announcement for you. The Painful Sex course for Catholic women is open for enrollment starting now. Enrollment is only open until August 5th, so join today. If you experience any kind of pain with sex, this course is for you. We take a two-pronged approach that no other painful sex program takes. We focus on both mindset and your pelvic floor. This program also includes live group coaching and live workouts. Click the link in the show notes or go to vinesinfullbloom.com/painfulsex. How do we manage the difference in sex drive that my spouse and I have? It's such a problem in our marriage. Have you said this before? Have you asked this question or had this thought before? From what I've found in my coaching and in all of the messages I get from you guys on Instagram and via email, this is a problem that every single married couple wrestles with because the probability of two spouses having the same sex drive at all times is pretty much zero. So every single couple deals with this disparity of sex drive at some point or another. So what we're going to be digging into in this week's episode is really what we should be focusing on and what we should be addressing when we see this disparity of sex drive and we feel like it's really causing problems in our marriage and in our sex life. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. So this topic has been coming up a lot lately in emails that I've been getting and DMs on Instagram, and I just wanted to address it. And this is just going to be an episode I sat down to coffee with you and you came to me with this issue. And it's just me giving you a little bit of sisterly tough love about disparity of desire. Over and over again, no matter which side the disparity is coming from, what I mean by disparity of desire is that one spouse has a higher sex drive than the other. One spouse wants sex more than the other. That might be the man, that might be the woman. It doesn't really matter which one it is. But over and over again, I hear, oh, if this problem just wasn't a problem, then we wouldn't have issues in our sex drive. And this disparity of desire is the reason that we have so many issues. And that is a completely untrue statement. And a lot of what Kathleen and I talked about in the episode from maybe a few months ago, that was Thank God for Your Husband's Sex Drive, we talked about how the disparity of desire is not the problem. We touched on it a little bit. And so that's what I'm going to be really diving into here. And this is an episode for those of you women who have higher desire and those of you women who have lower desire, because everybody complains about it. Everybody struggles with this particular aspect of sex and intimacy. So you're not alone in the struggle, whether you have higher desire than your spouse or lower desire than your spouse. You are not alone. But here's my sisterly tough love for you, is you've got to stop pinpointing this as the problem. Because what is sexual desire? Most of the time, when we say, libido, or we're talking about sexual desire, I have a higher sex drive. What we mean is that I physically desire sex more often than my spouse does. And typically what that means is that that person probably has spontaneous desire. Spontaneous desire means that spontaneously, as the title suggests, spontaneously the body is going to want sex. It's a physical desire. The other kind of desire is responsive. Responsive desire requires physical arousal before there is that physical desire to have sex. So almost all of the issues that we have with difference in desire actually stem from one of you is responsive and one of you is spontaneous. And there is a lack of understanding of the differences there of which one of you is spontaneous, which one of you is responsive. And there's lack of understanding of how desire for sex works. Because what I hear a lot is the spouse who has spontaneous desire wants their spouse to spontaneously desire sex. And that's just not possible for someone who has responsive desire. That isn't how it works. And yeah, it's okay to want that, but we also need to accept our spouse the way they are. And if our spouse has responsive desire, then we need to recognize that. And again, if this is your situation, if you're the spouse with spontaneous desire and your spouse has responsive desire, that is something that we need to recognize in our relationship and accept as part of our relationship. Because that's not something that's going to change. Now, there are sex drive issues, and I talk a lot about this, of focusing on getting enough sleep, eating well, and managing stress. And that affects our sex drive more than anything else, those three things. And so if you're the spouse with higher desire and you are, constantly frustrated by your spouse's lower desire, that might be something to look into and encourage for them and support your spouse in getting enough sleep, eating well, eating enough protein, and managing stress. What kind of things can you take off of their plate? How can you make sure that your spouse gets enough sleep? Like, those are things that you can actively do, and they're just overall going to support not only your spouse's sex drive, but also just their overall health, because we should be eating well, we should be managing our stress, we should be sleeping well. So this goes on both sides, right? If you're the spouse with lower desire, or if your spouse has lower desire, there's ways that we can support those three aspects of sleeping well, eating well, and managing stress. But again, I want to go back to really, here's the issue, is we want something to blame. We don't have the sex life we want. We just don't. And that sucks. It sucks to not have the sex life that we want. Because we see these Hollywood movies where people are just having so much fun having sex, and it's pleasurable and it looks amazing. And these couples just look at each other and know, and they run off to the bedroom, and it's wonderful. And we hear these stories, we read books. I think books are actually worse than movies. All these romance novels that just have unrealistic sex lives in them. So it sucks that we don't have the sex life that we want. And the human condition is to blame. Because what happened at the fall, right? God's like, what happened, guys? And Adam's like, well, the woman gave me food, the woman that you put in here, right? So Adam's like, I'm going to blame the woman and I'm going to blame you, God. And then the woman's like, well, the serpent gave it to me, right? There's no ownership of the sin. And I'm not saying that having a bad sex life is a sin. I'm just saying that the human condition, the fallen human condition, is to blame something. Blaming the disparity of sex drives is not helping you get to a better sex life. Blaming the disparity of sex drives is literally only making things worse, because now you've created this chasm between you. And now you're labeled. You've labeled yourself as the one who has higher or lower sex drive, and you've labeled your husband as the one who has higher or lower sex drive. You've now labeled each other, and the things that we tell ourselves in our mind are what come to be. Our minds are so powerful. And so if we're constantly telling ourselves, I'm the one with the lower sex drive, do you think we're ever gonna have a desire to have sex? Probably not if we keep telling ourselves that we don't want to. We'll be right back with the episode in a moment. How's your sex life? No, really, how is your sex life? Is it fulfilling, enjoyable, and intimate? No? Trust me, you are not alone if your sex life is not what you'd like it to be. But listen up, it does not have to stay that way. You can have the sex life of your dreams that is beautiful, pleasurable, pleasing to God, and just overall awesome. And you can start transforming your sex life today with the Catholic Sex Course for Women. In this course, we dig into your specific pain points, whether that's communication, sex drive and libido, mechanics, church teaching, or maybe mindset and focus. Whatever it is that's standing in the way of you and your spouse having a phenomenal sex life, you can overcome it. Check out the Catholic Sex Course for Women today by clicking the link in the show notes or going to vinesinfobloom.com/Catholic sex. One of the things I think that is really an issue with this disparity of drive then is like initiation and the no that comes from initiation. There's this frustration with, I want to have sex. I have asked my spouse and my spouse said no. Or vice versa. I really don't feel like having sex and my spouse keeps asking me to have sex. And so I keep saying no. And then there's a frustration here. That's not a sex drive issue. That's not an issue with sex at all. That issue right there is a communication issue. You and your husband need to have a lay it all out discussion about sex, about initiating, about how hard it is when you initiate and get a no. Or about how hard it is when they initiate and it's obvious that you don't want to have sex. You need to work on how to communicate through this difficulty, because this is a hard thing. Because wanting sex and initiating sex is the most vulnerable thing you can do. I did a podcast episode about this a couple of months ago, literally titled The Most Vulnerable Thing You Can Do. And that is initiating sex. And so when we get a no, it doesn't feel like it's a no to an activity. It feels like it's a no to our entire being and self. I'm not discounting the fact that like getting a no from initiation is heart-wrenching. But at the same time, we need to see each other's sides. We need empathy in this situation. We need good communication. We need to understand, okay, what kinds of things, if I'm the higher desire spouse, what kinds of things help my spouse to desire sex? And how can I do those things? And if we're the lower desire spouse, what kinds of things help me to desire sex? And how can I do those kinds of things or ask for those kinds of things? And then flip it again for the higher desire spouse. How does it feel to my spouse when I am constantly initiating? How does it feel? Right? Yes, your feelings are valid as well, but we need to recognize our spouse's feelings because I hear it from both sides of the argument and everybody's frustrated, the higher desire spouse and the lower desire spouse. We need to lay it on the table and just talk about it. How does it feel? And when we can recognize how it feels and we can actually empathize, we can actually put our feet in the shoes of the other person and recognize how they're feeling, then instead of this initiating issue just turning into like an argument and a frustration, it can be a great place of intimacy, regardless of if it's a yes or a no. But that initiation conversation can be a great place of intimacy. Because let's give an example. Anna and Jake. Anna has the higher desire. Jake has the lower desire, generally. Anna typically initiates about 3 times a week, and Jake says yes, maybe once. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating to Anna because she feels like she is constantly being rejected. It is heartbreaking when Jake says no to her because it feels like he's saying no to all of her. She feels unloved sometimes when he says no. And on Jake's end, Jake is a very stressed man. He's got a lot on his mind, and he feels very frustrated with how often sex is being asked of him. It's a lot of work to get in the mindset of having sex because so much else is going on in his life and in his mind. And transitioning to that is hard. And he recognizes that there's some issues there that maybe need to be addressed, but at the same time, it is so hard to feel like he's constantly being asked to give something that he doesn't have the capacity to give. And so Jake regularly says no because he just can't. He just feels like he can't. So see how there's frustrations on both sides? What these two need to do is sit down and explain how it feels to be rejected, how it feels to be initiated to, and then problem solve what can be done, right? Typically on the side of the lower desire spouse, there is something that needs to be addressed in life, right? So there's high stress. So maybe Jake needs to learn some stress management techniques. Maybe a counselor would help or some mindset coaching to learn how to manage stress. Or maybe it's more drastic than that. Maybe the job he's in is not a good fit and the family actually needs to look into him changing jobs. Sleep, eat, stress management. So a lot of times on the side of the lower desire spouse, there likely is going to be an issue with stress management, adequate sleep, or adequate calorie intake, especially protein. But then also there's possibly what is at play here is just the difference in responsive versus spontaneous desire. And that is something that, again, it's like, all we really need is to just lay it out and really understand the difference there. And once we can understand that difference, then things start to get a little better. I myself, as someone who has responsive desire, once I learned that aspect of myself, it was actually a lot easier to say yes to sex because I realized that I didn't actually need to want to have sex in order to lovingly say yes. Like it was okay that I didn't have a physical desire to have sex. Sometimes it's a very simple switch that we need, but that switch isn't going to happen if we don't talk about it. All right. So let's stop blaming the disparity of desires and let's start talking to each other about what's really going on and really how we're feeling about sex and about initiating and about rejection. And dig into the real issue. Let's heal the root cause, not just blame the symptom. Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.